Our goal is to not just improve the billing automation, but to provide better information for reviewing the invoices and better information on the invoice for the customer's use. Better invoices, less inquiries from the customer ultimately result in better cash flow. We're providing two separate but independent enhancements. First, we are exposing both the timesheet note and the transaction date in the invoice document screen view. Now you can see the days a resource actually worked or the date of a billable expense. Secondly, we're exposing the bill-to-date amount in the custom invoice format facility. This last feature will enable improved progress billing invoices so the customer can see exactly where he is on a contract. So let's take a closer look at these new improvements in the project billing information. First, let's go to the timesheet. And you see I've set up a timesheet here for the first week in January. And on each of my days, I do have some timesheet notes specified for each one of these. Let's see how that flows through. So I'll go over to Generate Invoices. I'm going to pick my project. I'm going to go to Display Options and make sure we sort this by date. It's going to be easier to see on the invoice that way. By the way, while I'm in here, I do want to mention one enhancement that came out last month, I believe. These billable transaction filters previously only worked on the display preview invoice. These are now effective for generating invoices offline as well. So this can be very valuable, for instance, if you want to create different invoices for billable time versus employee expenses. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a preview here. So we can see that we've got some billable time for that first week in January. We've also got some expenses posted in December. We've got an AP bill that's billable, and also a purchase order vendor invoice that's billable. Let's go ahead and create that invoice. And well, let's go take a look at it. Invoice 474. So notice now that in my view of the invoice, I can see, first of all, the transaction dates for each line item. So these are the 4 days I worked that week, and it also shows the timesheet notes. On the billable travel, it shows my transaction dates, as well as for my AP bill and my PO vendor invoice. Now for the billable travel, billable expenses coming out of the expense system, if you put in a line item transaction date, it will use that, show that here. If you don't put in a line item transaction date, it will use the expense report date. So very valuable information when reviewing or approving the invoice before it's sent to the customer. Okay, so let's talk about our second enhancement to invoicing. We need to take a look at the transaction definition first and show a new option in there. I'll go to my sales invoice transaction definition. And at the very bottom, under the print section, there's a new checkbox that says enable display of actual billings on printed or emailed invoices. So what this option does is it actually allows you to pull the actual billings to date from the project summary and display it on the printed invoice. And you have to select this transaction definition by transaction definition, so you actually have to turn this option on. So let's take a closer look how this works. When I'm setting up my Word document, and I choose my order entry application and my sales invoice transaction definition, you'll see there's a new field here in the Insert Merge Field list called Project Actual Billings. And you can see this is my template for my invoice, and I've put not just Project Actual Billings here on the invoice, but also project budget amount. So let's take a look how that is going to look like in an actual example. So let's go back to our invoice. And we're actually going to print this invoice this time. And I'll go ahead and print it to the screen. So you can see that I now can include the bill to date, including this invoice, right on the invoice for the customer to see what his status is compared to the contracted billing amount. Also note that we implemented this with parent-child support. So if you have child projects billing with your parent project, the actual billings is calculated by adding up all the actual billings from both the parent and those children that are marked as being billed with parent. So very valuable information both for you, the person creating the invoice, and also for the customer.